Hearing Her Call by Cali Prince. I would first like to acknowledge that I have created and that I am recording this work on Dharug country, the unceded lands of Dharug Nation, and to acknowledge their elders and peoples and communities, past, present, and emerging. In the in Dharug language, welcome and hello is Worimi. And in my own ancestral lineage on my maternal line, to say hello in Sinti Romani is Lacho Chives. I also want to acknowledge that the weaving work that I share in part with you today, I learned through a community art project that I worked on around 2019 at Blacktown Arts Centre led by Maria Mitter. And it was with a diverse group of women from all different cultural backgrounds, many migrant women here in Western Sydney. And that I mentored the community artist in community arts processes. And in part of that exchange, I learnt how to weave from the artists leading the project and also all of the women, many women who had been weaving in many other countries prior to their arrival in Australia. So some of that knowledge I'm sharing with you today in the way that I've created my autoethnographic works. I also want to acknowledge the words of Norman Denson, quote, "Writing creates the worlds we inhabit." And this is really to acknowledge that the act of writing, the act of autoethnography, the act of the arts-based inquiry, poetic inquiry that I've been undertaking and that I'll share with you is not only a reflection, it's actually creating. It's an act that creates worlds that we inhabit. And that is really something that we will return to at the end of this presentation, because the fact that it goes beyond being a reflection and that it is a direct action in the world is of central importance and focus in the work. I'm also basing a lot of what I'm sharing with you today on some earlier works. It's in part of an iterative body of work. And I presented at ISAN last year a new piece that I've been developing, and it's still in development, around, it's called Mirror, Starlight or Seeds, Reflections on Conversations with My Teachers. And you can see there are some key words in there that each link to poems that I've dedicated to each of my teachers. I'm going to pull out a couple of these words today. The main one here in the centre, you can see the words "tell it lightly" and also the words "creative resistance." And I'm now linking that to this new work that I'm going to be sharing with you today. I'm also drawing in many ways as well, conceptually, but also in its full body of work on my earlier work in my doctoral research, and then the work that came out of my doctoral research, including articles and performance autoethnographies that I have performed and published. What's important in this work is that it's a work about the research uncovered contaminated land that migrant communities, Indigenous communities, Australian Indigenous communities, and particularly women who carried these stories about these contaminated lands that contained radioactive waste, intermediate to high level radioactive waste stored on these lands in Western Sydney. And this research used poetry, arts-based research, and also performance autoethnography to bring their stories, to bring their words verbatim in poetic texts, to perform them at the centre. There's some information about an article that details this methodology published in Qualitative Inquiry here and in the references. What was also important is I developed an approach, a methodology called sensory poetic relationship mapping, and that's detailed in this article. But the work that I'm sharing with you today is going to connect to this earlier work, including sensory poetic relationship mapping. While I'll only be able to share part of it with you today, what I want to introduce to you is this new work called Hearing Her Call. And it's a multimodal work. It's literally and metaphorically weaving and interconnecting these earlier works into a much bigger tapestry and body of work. What interconnects all of these works, these iterative works, are stories of resistance. And they are interconnected by the common thread of care. And on the other side, so in the baskets you can see in front of you, the baskets, one of those baskets carries actually the word care in it. But on the other side of care is silencing. The shadow side is the silencing of non-dominant narratives, the narratives of marginalized communities most often, by what are often interconnected dominant greater powers who would have these narratives or these stories not told. Today, I'm exploring this in this new work where I am exploring this in relation to older bodies, including elders. It's in relation to a direct experience with one of my key mentors of many years, of over 20 years. And also interconnecting this to the ancient body of the earth, as well as the ancient knowledge and old knowledge that is carried in communities, including particularly marginalized communities. I'm starting with two new poems, the first Elders and the second one, Hearing Her Call. Each poem has been created with a basket, a hand-woven basket that I've created, and it has poetry, actually that poem threaded throughout it. And I'm going to come back to my earlier work, Mirror, Starlight or Seeds, in a moment as to why this is important and the iterative nature of the work. However, the work also includes found objects. So you can see there are some found objects that are incorporated. The bone connects it to bone poems. The feathers that you can see in the yellow basket represent in the first poem a connection to my teacher, my mentor. The woven baskets also represent care, the carrying of responsibility that we carry, and most particularly how we carry these stories. And this is an image just sharing with you how the poetry is actually threaded and woven into the baskets. The vision is that this will create a much larger work. This is really a conceptual piece still at this stage that I'm exploring. This will connect to a much bigger woven work that will also involve performance autoethnography, where I will be performing this woven work at the centre. This very much draws on the wisdom of an elder who I've given the pseudonym Jane from my doctoral research, who taught me, quote, "Tell it lightly in not one but a series of works." And this is a poem from my presentation last ISAN. So tell it lightly, Jane said. And this has led me to create this body of iterative works that I'm now beginning to thread together through this woven work that will turn into a multimodal installation and performance autoethnography. What is important about that, I'll come back to later, is how it is able to bring these stories forward when otherwise they would be silenced by the dominant powers who would have those stories not heard. I also want to highlight a new article that's been published by Mishra, who talks about how poetic inquiry, which I've incorporated with my approach to autoethnography, how it disrupts traditional power dynamics in research. And in my earlier doctoral research, I quote community, the voices of people within the communities verbatim, cross-check that work back with them, opening it up for modification and changes from them if they wish. And I think these processes are all very important. I also want to highlight in the article by Grant and Zeman, 2012, that autoethnography enables the detailed interrogation and critique of potentially or actually and repressive cultural institutions, norms, values, practices, and logics. And most particularly, what I'm interested in here is that these master narratives do often come across as being benign or very rational, in contrast to these alternate narratives. But autoethnography actually gives is a way in which these alternative narratives can be heard, can be told, can be enacted in the world. So if we come back to Norman Denzin's quote, that this is actually creating, this act is creating a world within worlds. And it is the action that is so important. I'll be very brief in this, but I just wanted to anchor this in terms of my methodological approach is autoethnography that intersects arts-based research, poetic inquiry, narrative inquiry, and in this case, it is developing into a performance autoethnography. The process and methods that I use include poetry, photography, site-specific performance readings, weaving, and objects as metaphor. I'd like to begin with the first poem, Elders. This is dedicated to my teacher, Noel Tovey, who was Australia's first Aboriginal male ballet dancer internationally, of international recognition, and he's been my mentor for many years, and this is dedicated to him. An old body has no value in this culture. She is neither seen nor celebrated. An old earth has no value in this culture. She is not protected. My teacher, an elder, has his old black and disabled body lays in a hospital bed in East Ward. I want the surgery, he said. If I don't come back, I don't care. And if I do, I want to live a few more years, he said. He is not treated the same as an able-bodied white patient in the meeting, I said. I treat all my patients the same, the registrar cried in his reply, after giving the news of the doctor's final determination not to operate. You may think you treat all your patients the same. I said, but do you? Does the system, the institutions that you work within? I think not, I said. They don't care about the old ones, the old bodies across time and space, surrendering to the passage of gravity, the old ones' knowledge handed down. I want this. Across time and space, from heart to bone, from bone to heart and back again. We carry the knowledge of the old ones in our bones. I ache. I grieve. I weave this embodiment into form. Do it your own way, were the last words he said before I said goodbye. So this was written most recently just over Christmas, where I visited my teacher, Noel, who was very unwell in hospital and is still unwell. The second poem I've dedicated, and they've been written at separate times, to another teacher of mine. I've been doing teachings with Minari Ushigua from the Sapara Nation of the Amazon. And I've been doing these teachings, various different teachings online since last Easter. And this particular poem I'm going to share with you was written over Easter. in the middle of those teachings, very intensive teachings with Minari. I won't detail the actual teachings here, but I'm sharing the work that it inspired in me. And I want to share in my acknowledgement a quote from Minari. Minari says, "We human beings are not the center of life. We are part of other living beings that live in this world. We are not the most important one, but rather all living beings that live in this world are important. We need to understand that." Ashigua 2023. I'm now going to play a video poem and we will listen to that now. I need to disconnect my headphones to do that, so just bear with me. Poem 2, Her Call. I am led by the call as I enter her forest, of frogs in the gully, the crescendo of cicadas, as I walk the path to her rock. Crows cry, and the crack of sticks break at my feet. Every time I come to her, I encounter beauty. In the tiny red buds of she-oak flowers, dagger hakea in full bloom, or the orange fungi burst from the arms of dead branches, lining the forest floor. In the buzzing of bees collecting nectar from abundant yellow flowering bushes, all around is a symphony. The eyes in the gnarled old man banksia that grows beside the rock, in the crevice where I sit, the laugh of the kookaburras, the peaceful gaze of elders and ancestors, in the rugged terrain and the shape of a fish head. I encounter awe in the event of nothing, and yet everything. That is life itself. I learn sitting in stillness, touching the sacred, even amidst the barking dogs and the rumble of trucks that punctuate the silences. In the distance, the bush continues to bloom. Yellow flowers full of humming wings. At the winter's end and at the tip of spring, from this secret place, I learn about the dance of life and how such unknown beauty arises and exists at the edge of a rubbish tip. Yet here and across the horizon dances her continuing, untouched perfection. So that concludes poem two. Because of time, I'm going to keep this very brief in conclusion, except to say if we come back to the words of Jane, tell it lightly, that this wisdom that I have been taught by Jane is how to tell these narratives that the dominant powers would not have told, would not have being told. It is a way to bring these stories forward in iterative or small works that interconnect over time and space. And this process that I am now experimenting and exploring and developing is how all these earlier iterative works that were telling it lightly can finally come together into a much larger piece of work, an autoethnographic and arts-based work, arts-based inquiry with poetic inquiry and sensory poetic relationship mapping, all of those. How can this all be brought together into a much larger tapestry as an act of creative resistance? And in that is a very important story about listening to our elders and also about how we treat elders, including the earth as an ancient being. Thank you. If you would like to contact me, these are my contact details.